The twin suns of Skorzar 9 blazed mercilessly in the violet sky, their combined heat transforming the red desert into a furnace that seemed designed for one purpose: to extract every last molecule of moisture from anything unfortunate enough to land on its surface. The interspecies exploration vessel Horizon had touched down 3 hours ago, leaving a deep impression in the fine, rust-colored sand that was already being erased by the constant, subtle shifting of the dunes. Logan Pierce watched as Commander Voker stomped across the landing site, the draconian scaled feet leaving distinctive, three-toed prints that vanished almost as quickly as they were made. Despite the crushing heat, Voker's spine remained rigid, his emerald scales glistening with natural oils rather than sweat. The commander's reputation for unwavering discipline was well-earned, even in these hostile conditions. "Pierce, stop your daydreaming and help with the equipment," Voker barked, his voice a gravelly rumble that matched his reptilian appearance. "We have a 12-day mission, and I won't have it compromised by human lethargy." Logan nodded respectfully, tucking his old-fashioned sketchbook into his pack. The other team members had already expressed their amusement at his antiquated habit of drawing and taking handwritten notes. But Logan found the practice grounding. In a galaxy where everything was digitized, automated, and synthetically enhanced, there was something reassuring about the feel of pencil on paper. "Right away, Commander," Logan replied, hurrying toward the cargo hold where the Yangar twins, Kran and Soru, were unloading atmospheric sensors. The twins' azure skin was already taking on a paler hue, their natural bioluminescent patterns flickering erratically along their forearms, a sign they were experiencing discomfort. "This atmosphere is worse than the reports indicated," Kran muttered, her forearms working in perfect synchronization as she assembled a monitoring station. "Zero humidity. Literally zero." Soru nodded in agreement, his movements mirroring his sister's with the uncanny precision that made Yangarians such valued engineers. "The atmospheric composition is correct, but the moisture content—" He paused, tapping the readout display. "I've never seen such absolute dryness." Logan frowned, squinting up at the violet sky. Could the twin suns be causing more rapid evaporation than our models predicted? He knelt down, letting the fine sand run through his fingers. "There's not even subsurface moisture." "The human asks obvious questions," came a crystalline voice from behind them. The team's xenobiologist, Quetzal, approached with an almost musical clinking sound. The crystalline's translucent body refracted the harsh sunlight in dazzling patterns across the sand. "Of course, the dual stars create enhanced evaporation. What is more concerning is the failure of our predictive models." Logan had learned to ignore Quetzal's condescending tone. The crystalline species prided themselves on their logical thinking and precise calculations, and made little effort to hide their belief that humans relied too heavily on intuition and emotion. "The water synthesizer is set up," announced Mara, the team's Telnari astronavigator. Her luminous skin emitted a soft blue glow that pulsed gently as she spoke. Unlike the Yangar twins, whose bioluminescence was primarily decorative, Telnari used their light emissions for complex communication among their own kind. "Commander Voker wants it operational immediately." The water synthesizer was the mission's lifeline, a sophisticated device designed to extract moisture from the atmosphere and convert it into potable water. Standard equipment for all exploration missions. It had never failed them on previous expeditions, even in harsh environments. Logan helped carry the remaining equipment to the base camp they were establishing about 100 meters from the ship. The prefabricated shelter units were already being assembled by the team's robotic assistants, their silver forms moving with precise efficiency under the punishing suns. Commander Voker stood before the water synthesizer, his scaled fingers dancing across its control panel. "Initiate extraction sequence," he ordered, and the machine hummed to life, its intake vents opening like mechanical gills. The team gathered around, watching expectantly. After 30 seconds, the synthesizer should have produced the first drops of water. After 60 seconds, the collection tank should have begun to fill. After 2 minutes, the machine's operational lights shifted from green to amber. After 3 minutes, they flashed red. "Impossible!" Voker hissed, his tail lashing in agitation. "Run the diagnostic!" Soru stepped forward, connecting his personal device to the synthesizer's diagnostic port. His bioluminescent patterns darkened with concern as he read the results. "The synthesizer is functioning correctly," he reported. "There's simply nothing to extract. The atmospheric moisture is registering at 0.00001%, effectively none." A heavy silence fell over the group, broken only by the constant, low moan of the wind across the dunes. "The secondary unit," Voker began, "uses the same extraction technology," Quetzal interrupted, the crystalline's body briefly clouding with stress. "If there is no moisture to extract, a second unit will not solve our problem." "We have the emergency water rations," Mara suggested, her glow dimming slightly. "Enough for 4 days if we're careful." 4 days in a 12-day mission, Cran said quietly. "And that's assuming the retrieval shuttle arrives exactly on schedule." Logan felt the first stirrings of real concern. Water was the one resource that couldn't be compromised on, regardless of species. Even Quetzal, whose crystalline biology required less water than the others, needed some hydration to maintain proper molecular structure. "We should send a distress signal," Logan suggested. "Request an emergency extraction." Vokor's head swiveled toward him, yellow eyes narrowing. "And abandon the mission. This expedition cost the Interspecies Alliance more than you earn in a decade. Pierce, we are here to catalog this planet's mineral composition and assess its potential for mining operations. We will complete that task." "Not if we're dead from dehydration," Logan countered, immediately regretting his bluntness when Voker's scaled nostrils flared. "Perhaps the human would prefer to wait in the ship," the commander said coldly. "The rest of us will adapt and overcome, as professionals do." Logan fell silent, recognizing that pushing further would only antagonize the proud Draconian. Instead, he turned his attention to the environment around them, his scientific mind already working on alternatives. There had to be water somewhere on this planet. No celestial body could form without it. The question was whether they could access it within their limited time frame and with their available resources. That night, as the team huddled in the climate-controlled shelter, Logan noticed that the Younger twins were drinking less than they should. Their species required more hydration than most, their cellular structure dependent on maintaining high levels of moisture. Yet they were clearly rationing themselves beyond what was safe. "You need to drink more," Logan told them quietly, offering his own ration. "Your physiology can't handle this level of dehydration." Soru shook his head, the gesture almost identical to his sister's. "We've calculated the minimum requirements for each team member. You need your share as much as we need ours." Logan wanted to argue, but was interrupted by Commander Voker. "Tomorrow we begin the survey," the Draconian announced. "We'll split into 3 teams to cover more ground. Mara and I will head east toward the ridgeline. Quetzal and Cran will investigate the northern valley. Logan and Soru will map the western flats." As the others discussed the technical aspects of the survey, Logan's mind wandered back to Earth history, specifically to ancient desert survival techniques. His grandfather had been something of a survivalist enthusiast, teaching young Logan skills that most modern humans considered obsolete. One memory in particular surfaced: the construction of a solar water trap. It was almost laughably primitive compared to their synthesizer technology. A simple pit dug into the ground, covered with a transparent sheet that condensed moisture from the soil and vegetation, collecting it in a container. But the principle was sound, using temperature differentials to force condensation. When the others had fallen asleep, their rest cycles synchronized to Scorzar-9's 27-hour rotation. Logan quietly accessed the ship's database on his personal device. He searched for information on the planet's subsurface composition and nocturnal temperature fluctuations. What he found gave him a glimmer of hope. While the surface temperature remained brutally hot during the day, it dropped significantly at night. More importantly, deep scanning had detected trace elements consistent with subsurface water deposits. Not liquid water, but chemically bound in certain minerals. If he could create a device to extract and condense that moisture. The next morning, as the teams prepared to depart for their surveys, Logan approached Commander Volker. "Sir, I have an idea about the water situation," he began cautiously. Volker barely glanced at him. "Unless your idea involves making the synthesizer work with no atmospheric moisture, I'm not interested." "Actually, it's about creating a different kind of water extraction system. A solar water trap that could—" The commander cut him off with a dismissive wave. "We have the most advanced technology the Alliance has developed, and you want to try some human camping trick?" His tone made it clear what he thought of the suggestion. "Focus on your assigned tasks. Pierce, leave the survival planning to those qualified to handle it." The rejection stung. But Logan hadn't really expected anything different. The Draconians' trust in technology was typical of Alliance thinking. If the advanced solution failed, the answer was to develop an even more advanced solution, not to fall back on simpler methods. As Logan and Soru trekked across the western flats, cataloging mineral deposits and taking samples, Logan couldn't shake the idea from his mind. The more he observed the planet's surface, the more convinced he became that his plan could work. "Soru," he said finally, as they stopped to record a particularly interesting rock formation, "what do you know about thermal condensation?" The Yangarian looked up from his scanning device, his bioluminescence pulsing curiously. "It's a basic physical process. Why do you ask?" Logan explained his solar trap concept, sketching it in his notebook as he spoke. Soru's expression remained neutral, but his light patterns shifted to a frequency that Logan had come to recognize as thoughtful consideration. "The principle is sound," Soru admitted eventually, "but the yield would be minimal compared to what we need." "Minimal is better than nothing," Logan pointed out. "And if we built multiple traps—" Soru's lights dimmed slightly. Commander Volker would never approve reallocating resources for an unproven human technique. "Then we don't ask for permission," Logan said, lowering his voice despite the fact that they were kilometers from the nearest team member. "We can salvage materials from the ship's non-essential systems. I've already identified components we could use." Soru's lights pulsed in alarm. "That would be against protocol." "So is dying of thirst," Logan replied grimly. They continued their survey in silence, but Logan could tell that Soru was considering his words. By the time they returned to base camp that evening, the Yangarian's bioluminescence had taken on a pattern that Logan couldn't interpret, something between anxiety and anticipation. The mood at camp had deteriorated. Mara's glow was noticeably dimmer, and even Quetzal's crystalline form seemed less vibrant, with tiny fracture lines visible along the xenobiologist's outer surface. Cran was in the worst shape, her azure skin taking on a grayish tinge that worried Logan immensely. "The samples we've collected show promising mineral content," Volker reported during their evening briefing, stubbornly focusing on the mission objectives rather than their increasingly dire situation. "Tomorrow, we'll extend the survey range by another 5 kilometers. "Commander," Mara interjected gently, "perhaps we should consider conserving energy. Our water rations are depleting faster than anticipated in these conditions." "We have a mission to complete," Volker insisted, though Logan noticed that the Draconians' own scales had lost some of their luster. That night, while the others slept, Logan silently gathered the materials he needed. From the ship's damaged external sensor array, he salvaged a sheet of thermal film. From a decommissioned atmosphere processor, he extracted tubing and a collection vessel. It wasn't ideal, but it would serve as a prototype. He worked through the night, digging a shallow pit about 50 meters from the camp, placing vegetation and moisture-absorbing material he'd collected during the day's survey at the bottom. Over this, he stretched the thermal film in a cone shape, securing it with rocks and positioning the collection vessel at the center point. If his calculations were correct, when the suns rose, they would heat the pit, causing any moisture in the materials to evaporate and condense on the underside of the film, eventually dripping into the vessel. By dawn, Logan was exhausted but hopeful. He returned to camp just as the others were waking, pretending he'd simply risen early. He caught Soru watching him curiously, but said nothing about his nighttime activities. The day's surveys proceeded as planned, though at a slower pace. Everyone was feeling the effects of restricted water intake now. Cran had to stop frequently to rest, her movements becoming increasingly uncoordinated. Even Voker, for all his determination, couldn't maintain his usual pace. When they returned to camp that evening, disaster struck. Cran collapsed as they were setting up the equipment for the next day's work, her bioluminescence flickering erratically before fading to an alarming dull blue. "Cran!" Soru rushed to his twin's side, cradling her in his forearms, his own lights pulsing in distress patterns. Quetzal immediately began scanning her with a medical device. "Severe dehydration," the crystalline announced. "Her cellular integrity is compromised." "Give her the emergency medical ration," Voker ordered, his voice tight with concern despite his earlier stoicism. Mara quickly retrieved the small vial of superhydrating solution, their last resort for medical emergencies. It was enough to stabilize Cran temporarily, but her condition made the reality of their situation impossible to ignore any longer. "We need to send a distress signal," Mara said firmly. "Request immediate extraction." Voker's tail lashed in frustration, but he nodded reluctantly. "Prepare the communication array." As the others focused on Cran and the distress signal, Logan slipped away from camp. He hurried to his solar trap, heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. If it had failed, they were truly in trouble. The thermal film cone was exactly as he'd left it, shimmering slightly in the fading light of the twin suns. With trembling hands, Logan knelt beside it, carefully peeling back one edge to check the collection vessel. There, at the bottom of the container, was a small pool of clear liquid, perhaps 100 milliliters of water. It had worked. Logan's hands shook as he carefully removed the vessel, making sure not to spill a drop of the precious liquid. He covered it immediately to prevent evaporation and hurried back to camp, his fatigue forgotten in the rush of success. He arrived to find the team in disarray. "The communication array isn't responding," Quetzal was saying, the crystalline's body clouding with stress. "Something is interfering with the signal." "It's a magnetic storm," Mara explained, her glow pulsing erratically as she studied her instruments. "Coming from the larger sun. It's disrupting all electronic communications and could affect our other systems as well." As if in response to her warning, the lights in the camp flickered and went out, plunging them into the deep purple twilight of Scorzar 9's evening. "Backup generators," Voker commanded. But even as he spoke, they heard the whine of the power systems shutting down completely. "The magnetic interference is too strong," Soru said, not looking up from where he cradled his unconscious sister. "It's affecting all power regulation systems." In the dim light cast by Mara's natural bioluminescence, Logan saw the fear on everyone's faces. Even Voker's reptilian features couldn't hide his concern. Without power, without communications, and with their water nearly gone, their situation had just become critical. "I have water," Logan announced, stepping forward and holding up the collection vessel. "Not much, but it's something." All eyes turned to him in disbelief. Impossible, Quetzal stated. The synthesizer is non-functional. I didn't use the synthesizer, Logan explained, quickly describing the solar water trap he'd constructed. It's based on an ancient Earth technique. The thermal differential between day and night forces condensation of moisture from the soil and vegetation. You built this trap without authorization? Voker's voice was dangerously quiet. I did, Logan admitted. And it works. It's not much, but if we build more, larger ones, we could collect enough water to survive until the magnetic storm passes. For a long moment, Voker simply stared at him, the Draconian's yellow eyes unreadable in the dim light. Then, to Logan's surprise, he nodded. Give the water to Cran, the commander ordered. Then show us how to build these traps. The next few hours were a flurry of activity. Using Mara's bioluminescence and the emergency chemical lights they had in their survival kits, the team worked together to construct 5 more solar traps, each larger than Logan's prototype. They salvaged materials from non-essential equipment, following Logan's design, but improving it with their various technical expertise. Quetzal, whose crystalline structure allowed for precise cutting, shaped better collection vessels. The Yangar twin Soru, now that his sister had been stabilized with the water from Logan's first trap, engineered a more efficient condensation surface, using his knowledge of thermal dynamics. Even Voker contributed, his powerful limbs digging deeper pits that could access soil with higher mineral-bound water content. By the time Skorzar 9's moons rose, 3 pale disks that provided surprisingly strong silver light, they had completed all 6 traps and positioned them strategically around the camp. They'll collect water overnight, Logan explained. But the real yield will come tomorrow when the suns heat the pits. The temperature differential will force condensation. That night, as they huddled in the powerless shelter, relying on body heat and emergency thermal blankets for warmth, Logan found himself seated beside Commander Voker. The Draconian had been uncharacteristically quiet since they'd finished the water traps. You knew the synthesizer would fail, Voker said finally, his voice low enough that the others, who were attempting to rest, wouldn't hear. No, Logan replied honestly. I hoped it wouldn't. But I've always believed in having backup plans that don't rely on the same technology. Different problems require different solutions. Vokur was silent for a long moment. On my homeworld, he said eventually, there is a philosophy called Kreshervin, the wisdom of multiple paths. It teaches that the strongest warrior is not the one with the sharpest claw, but the one who knows when to use claws, when to use stealth, and when to simply wait. He turned his yellow eyes to Logan. I had forgotten this wisdom. Technology has made us complacent. Technology isn't the problem, Logan said. It's wonderful when it works. But we should never forget the simpler solutions that got us here in the first place. The Draconian nodded, a gesture he had clearly adopted from working with humans. Rest now, Logan Pierce. Tomorrow we will need your human resourcefulness again. The next morning brought both hope and new challenges. The solar traps had worked even better than expected, yielding nearly 2 liters of water collectively, enough to give everyone a small but crucial drink. Cran was conscious again, though weak, and Quetzal's crystalline structure had stabilized with the moisture intake. However, the magnetic storm had intensified overnight, completely disabling the ship's systems and any hope of communication. Worse, the storm had triggered atmospheric disturbances that manifested as dust clouds on the horizon, deadly in a landscape where the fine particles could clog breathing apparatus and damage sensitive equipment. We cannot stay here, Voker announced after surveying the approaching dust storms. We need to find shelter and a way to signal for rescue once the magnetic interference subsides. The northern ridge, Mara suggested, her glow strengthening slightly with the water she'd consumed. My survey detected cave formations that could provide natural shelter, and the elevation would make any signal more visible. "It's at least 23 kilometers from here," Soru pointed out, supporting his sister, who was still unsteady on her feet. "And we'd need to carry the water traps," Logan added. "They're our only reliable source of hydration now." Vokur considered this, his scaled face set in grim determination. "We dismantle the camp, take only what we need for survival, and completing the mission. The solar traps are priority equipment." He looked at Logan. "Can they be made portable?" Logan nodded. "We'll need to empty them each morning before we travel, then set them up again when we make camp. But yes, they can be transported." "Then we move north," the commander decided. "We leave in 1 hour." The trek across Skorzar 9's desert was brutal. Despite the water from the solar traps, everyone was operating well below their optimal capacity. The twin suns beat down mercilessly, and the fine red sand made every step an effort. They carried stripped-down survey equipment, emergency supplies, and the components of the solar traps distributed among them. Logan found himself helping Kran, supporting the Yangarian with one arm while carrying his share of equipment with the other. Despite their different physiologies, he could feel the unnatural heat radiating from her azure skin, a dangerous sign for her species. "I'm slowing everyone down," she murmured, her bioluminescence barely visible in the harsh daylight. "We move together or not at all," Logan told her firmly. "No one gets left behind." They managed only 8 kilometers that first day, setting up a makeshift camp in the shadow of a towering red rock formation that offered some relief from the suns. Logan immediately organized the reconstruction of the solar traps, positioning them to maximize overnight condensation. That evening, as they shared the water collected during their journey, each person receiving barely enough to wet their mouth, Quetzal approached Logan. "Your method is primitive," the crystalline stated in that direct way, characteristic of their species. "But its effectiveness cannot be denied. I have been analyzing the process and believe I can improve the yield by adjusting the angle of the thermal film to account for the specific radiation wavelengths of Skorzar 9 suns." Coming from Quetzal, this was extraordinarily high praise. Logan smiled tiredly. Any improvement would be welcome. With Quetzal's modifications, the next morning's water collection increased by nearly 30%. Not enough to fully hydrate everyone, but enough to keep them going. They drank their rations, refilled their emergency containers, and continued their journey toward the northern ridge. The second day was harder than the first. The terrain became more challenging, with jagged rock formations breaking up the endless dunes. The dust storms visible on the horizon were drawing closer, occasionally sending advanced tendrils of fine particles that stung exposed skin and made breathing difficult. Mera, whose Telnari physiology was particularly sensitive to airborne particulates, began to struggle. Her bioluminescence dimmed to barely a flicker, and her steps became increasingly unsteady. "I can continue," she insisted, when Vokur suggested she rest in the shelter of a rock formation, while the others scouted ahead. The mission requires all of us to reach the ridge alive," the commander interrupted, his tone gentler than Logan had ever heard it. "We will find a suitable location to make camp and set up the solar traps. The water they collect overnight will strengthen you for tomorrow's journey." They made camp earlier than planned that day, having covered only 6 kilometers. As they set up the solar traps, Logan noticed Vokur staring at the distant ridge, calculating. "We still have 9 kilometers to go," the Draconian said, when he noticed Logan's gaze. "At our current pace, it will take 2 more days. The dust storms will reach us before then." "Then we need to move faster," Logan said simply. "How?" Vokur demanded, frustration evident in the lashing of his tail. "Everyone is at their limit. Even my own species' adaptations to harsh environments are being tested beyond their capacity." Logan considered the problem. "What if we travel at night?" he suggested. "The temperature drops significantly, and we could avoid the worst of the solar radiation. We'd need to use the emergency lights, but it might allow us to move more quickly. Vokur's yellow eyes widened slightly. Night travel, he mused. It goes against standard protocol for unknown terrain. But these are not standard circumstances. He nodded decisively. We will rest now and begin traveling when the sun set. The night journey proved to be a turning point. Under the silver light of Skorzar 9's 3 moons, the red desert took on an otherworldly beauty. The temperature, while still uncomfortably warm by Earth standards, was significantly more tolerable than the daytime inferno. Most importantly, they could move faster. Even Kran and Mara, who had struggled the most during the day, found their strength returning in the cooler conditions. They covered 12 kilometers before the first sun began to rise, bringing them within striking distance of the northern ridge. They made camp in the shadow of a massive dune, quickly setting up the solar traps to capture the morning condensation before the heat became too intense. As they settled in to rest during the brutal daylight hours, protected by their emergency shelters, Logan found himself seated beside Mara. The Telnari's bioluminescence had strengthened somewhat during the night journey, but it still pulsed weakly compared to her normal, vibrant glow. "Your solution saved us," she said quietly, her voice melodic even in its exhaustion. "The solar traps, the night travel, these are not approaches that would have occurred to the rest of us." "Different perspective, that's all," Logan replied, embarrassed by the praise. "Humans have a long history of having to make do with limited technology." Mara's light patterns shifted to a frequency that Logan recognized as amusement. "You undersell yourself, Logan Pierce. There is wisdom in remembering old ways." Her glow dimmed slightly as she added, "The Alliance has become overconfident in its technology. This experience is a valuable reminder of our vulnerabilities." They rested through the day, conserving energy and rationing the water collected from the morning's harvest. By the time the suns began to set again, everyone had recovered enough to make the final push to the ridge. The last leg of their journey was the most challenging yet. The terrain became increasingly rocky and steep as they approached the ridge, requiring careful navigation by the light of the moons and their emergency lamps. Several times they had to backtrack to find a passable route, aware that the dust storms were now just hours behind them. Dawn was breaking as they finally reached the base of the northern ridge, a towering wall of striated red rock that rose nearly 100 meters above the desert floor. Mara led them to the cave formations she had detected during her survey, which turned out to be a series of deep recesses in the cliff face, offering perfect shelter from both the suns and the approaching storms. "We need to establish a signal that can be seen from orbit," Vokur said, once they had set up their emergency camp in the largest cave. "The magnetic storm should pass within the next day or two, based on astronomical projections. When it does, rescue ships will begin searching for us." "The survey flares," Soru suggested. "If we position them along the ridgeline, they could be visible for hundreds of kilometers." "And we have the emergency beacon," Kran added, her strength returning after their successful journey. "Once the magnetic interference clears, it should transmit our coordinates." They spent the day setting up their signal system, positioning flares at strategic points along the ridge and establishing the emergency beacon at the highest accessible point. Meanwhile, the solar traps continued to provide them with precious water, their yield actually increasing in the rocky terrain, which contained more mineral-bound moisture than the open desert. That night, as they huddled in the cave watching the dust storm rage across the desert plain below them, Logan found himself surrounded by the team that had, just days ago, dismissed his ideas as primitive and unnecessary. "When we return to Alliance space," Quetzal announced, the crystalline's body now restored to its proper translucent clarity, "I will recommend that solar trap construction be added to the standard survival training for all exploration teams." "Seconded," Mara said, her bioluminescence once again pulsing with healthy vigor. "And that cross-species knowledge sharing be emphasized more strongly in team preparation." The Alliance has become too dependent on its technology, Voker agreed, his scales once again gleaming with their natural luster. We have forgotten that innovation often comes from necessity and limitation, not excess and abundance. Logan smiled, touched by their words but uncomfortable being the center of attention. We all contributed, he pointed out. Quetzal improved the trap design. Soru engineered better collection vessels. And without Voker's decision to travel at night, we wouldn't have reached safety in time. True, Kran acknowledged, her forearms gesturing in the Hungarian expression of respectful agreement. But it was your human perspective that showed us a different path when our technology failed us. They maintained their signal flares through the night, taking turns to ensure they remained visible. As the first sun began to rise on their fourth day at the ridge, Soru, who was on watch, spotted something in the brightening sky, a glint of metal that grew larger with each passing second. "Rescue ship!" he called, his bioluminescence flashing in excitement patterns. "They found us!" The team gathered at the cave entrance, watching as an Alliance patrol vessel descended through Skorzar 9's atmosphere, homing in on their signals. Despite their exhaustion and the ordeal they had endured, Logan felt a swell of pride as he looked at his teammates, different species, different biologies, but united in their determination to survive against the odds. As the patrol ship landed on a flat area below the ridge, Commander Voker turned to Logan, extending his scaled hand in the human gesture of respect. "You reminded us of something important," Logan Pierce, the Draconian, said formally. "That true exploration requires not just advanced technology, but the wisdom to know when to set it aside and rely on more fundamental principles." Logan clasped the commander's hand, nodding in acknowledgement of the rare compliment. As they gathered their essential equipment and prepared to board the rescue vessel, he took one last look at the solar traps that had saved their lives, simple devices of plastic, tubing, and collection vessels that had succeeded where cutting-edge Alliance technology had failed. They would leave the traps behind, a testament to human ingenuity and the power of remembering old wisdom, even as humanity reached for the stars. Perhaps someday, another exploration team would find them and understand the lesson they represented. That no matter how far technology advanced, the fundamental principles of survival remained unchanged. And sometimes, the simplest solution was the most elegant. As the rescue ship lifted off, carrying them away from the harsh beauty of Skorzar 9, Logan opened his sketchbook and began to draw the twin suns setting over the red desert, a reminder of the balance between advanced technology and ancient wisdom that would serve him well on future explorations among the stars.